Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump says he may or may not strike Iran. And that now is very late for negotiating. That's while the State Department is working to evacuate Americans from Israel. Jack Bradley's at the White House. Iran's supreme leader rejects President Trump's call for an unconditional surrender. This comes as Israel and Iran continue to launch deadly attacks against each other. Jason Perry reports. Fighting also continues in Ukraine. Rescue workers continue finding bodies after a large-scale Russian attack on Kyiv. Arian Pozdar has the war update. Lawmakers are concerned that the United States defense budget is not keeping pace with the Chinese Communist Party's military expansion. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. The Federal Reserve makes a unanimous decision on interest rates. What's ahead for inflation and the economy?
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump says it's possible that the U.S. could strike Iran. That's as the State Department is now working to evacuate U.S. citizens from Israel. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more for us from the White House.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final.
As there's no clear sign of slowdown in the Middle East, President Trump is weighing his options on the U.S. response. Asked whether the U.S. military will strike targets in Iran, particularly Iran's nuclear sites, Trump says,
I may do it, I may not do it.
Trump also says that Iran reached out to him and suggested coming to the White House for further talks.
Iran's got a lot of trouble, and they want to negotiate. And I said, why didn't you negotiate with me before all this death? I said, it's very late to be talking.
Now, Iran denies reaching out, and Trump reiterated that he gave Iran 60 days to strike a nuclear deal, and that the 61st was when Israel struck Iran just last week.
They should have made the deal. I had a great deal for them. They should have made that deal. 60 days, we talked about it, and in the end, they decided not to do it, and now they wish they did it.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, says Iran will never surrender and that U.S. targets will be hit if Trump joins in the conflict. Meanwhile, President Trump also unveiled two new flagpoles about 100 feet tall, one on the south lawn of the White House and the other on the north. Trump donated them, paying roughly $100,000. He also welcomed Italy's Juventus team to the Oval Office ahead of their match with the UAE team. Two players on Juventus are American. Now, these two teams will face off in the first phase of the FIFA World Cup, part of which is going to be held in the U.S. Meanwhile, the State Department says that it's working to evacuate U.S. citizens in Israel. U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee wrote on X, American citizens wanting to leave Israel. The U.S. Embassy in Israel is working to evacuate flights and cruise ship departures. You must enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. It's unclear how many Americans are seeking to depart Israel or if that the U.S. military will assist in the evacuation. That's as the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem will be shut down from Wednesday through Friday due to increased security risks. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
In the Middle East, Iran's supreme leader has rejected President Trump's call for an unconditional surrender. This comes as Israel and Iran continue to launch deadly attacks against each other. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update.
An Israeli drone was reportedly shot down in Iran on Wednesday, according to Iran's state-run media. A state reporter at the site of the wreckage pointed to markings on the drone that were written in Hebrew. And on the same day, Iran's state-run media read a statement from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. It was apparently in response to President Trump's recent post on Truth Social, which read, unconditional surrender. The state media anchor then read the supreme leader's statement.
The Iranian nation is not one that will surrender. The Americans should know that any military intervention by the U.S. will undoubtedly result in irreparable damage.
And on Wednesday, Iran released more footage that showed missiles it said were fired at Israel. And as sirens sounded across Israel, Israeli forces tried to intercept the incoming missiles. Since Friday, Iran has launched approximately 400 missiles at Israel. An Israeli policeman was seen inspecting the remains of an Iranian ballistic missile that landed in northern Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli forces released footage of their fighter jets taking off for more strikes in Iran, and Israel reported striking a nuclear centrifuge production site. Centrifuges can be used to enrich uranium, a significant step in creating a nuclear weapon. Israel's chief of the general staff gave an update on the war.
We are not waiting for those threats to materialize to the point where it is too late to address them. I believe that the operation we are conducting there will ultimately influence our ability to achieve better conditions to secure the return of our hostages.
Israel also reported striking 8 Iranian attack helicopters, a missile launcher that was reportedly ready to fire at Israel, and Iranian military operatives at a missile site in western Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a message as well.
I want to thank President Trump, a great friend of Israel. I thank him for standing by us, and I thank him for the support the United States offers us in defending Israel's skies.
Netanyahu also said Israel was striking, quote, symbols of the regime, as smoke was seen coming from various buildings in Tehran. And in a post on X, Israel's defense minister said that they had destroyed the Iranian regime's internal security headquarters. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Staying with updates from the Middle East, today evacuations to and from Israel were finally completed. Israelis returned home as foreigners, including many Americans, arrived in nearby Cyprus. A cruise ship carrying people fleeing Israel arrived in Cyprus today. Thousands of travelers had been left stranded because Israel's airspace was closed. Multiple young Americans who were visiting Israel say the last few days were very scary, adding that they are happy to be returning home. Meanwhile, the first flight bringing Israelis home from abroad landed in Tel Aviv today. They, too, had been stranded while the country's airspace was closed. Israel's government now plans to bring back an estimated 50,000 citizens. And Israel plans to gradually ease security restrictions in some parts of the country in order to reopen the economy. Israel's defense minister describes the move as a victory over Iran, showing resilience amid the incoming attacks. And what do everyday Americans think about President Trump's handling of the military conflict between Israel and Iran? And how should the U.S. respond if the situation escalates? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
How do you think President Trump has been navigating the situation between Israel and Iran?
I think he's been doing a really good job. He's given Iran a lot of leeway. He's given them 2 months to come to the tables to negotiate, and they haven't done it. You can only give them so much slack before you have to do something.
Poorly, because he said we have control over the skies over Iran when it's Israel has control.
But I do not want him to get involved again with any kind of conflict.
He has managed to keep a distance, yet at the same time put forth everything the American people feel should be done.
Because if you don't stop Iran in its tracks, what are they going to do with the nukes? They're going to get Israel, they're going to get all of our allies, and then all these other coalitions will team up, and then we're doomed.
If this conflict continues to escalate, how do you think the U.S. should respond to it?
The U.S. will back Israel to the end. Iran said, we have no intention of building a bomb. Basically, we're peace-loving people, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm Gerald Ford.
Stay out of it. Unless Iran does something in one of our embassies or something, then we should get involved. Besides that, stay out of it. Israel seems to have things under control.
The supply and logistics is fine. We just don't want to have boots on the ground. We have enough boots on the ground with the Israelis, and they're doing a great job.
I'm married to a veteran of Vietnam War, so he's really anti-war. I don't know. I don't want the U.S. to be involved if they don't have to be. But I support every troop that's out there, whatever they have to do.
We need to stand firm with Israel, but let them take the front. I think with our aerial support that we have and our fighting power through the air, we don't need to put boots on the ground. We can handle the business just from the sea and the air.
The death toll in Kyiv continues rising one day after a large-scale Russian attack on Ukraine. Moscow also works to strengthen ties with North Korea, even agreeing to build a memorial to North Korean soldiers. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has the Ukraine update.
Rescue workers in Kyiv continue finding bodies on Wednesday, one day after a large-scale Russian attack. Emergency workers are finding most of the victims under the rubble of a 9-story apartment building demolished by an incoming missile. The death toll from the latest attack on the Ukrainian capital now stands at 28.
I was especially scared to sleep last night. I already have a reflex. A car drives by and I hide my head. Scary, helplessness and fear. That's all I can say.
Flags are flying at half-mast across Ukraine on Wednesday as the country is observing a national day of mourning for the victims. Meanwhile, in North Korea, State TV showed the meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and a top Russian security official. The two meet as Moscow and Pyongyang continue strengthening ties. Now, during the meeting, the North Korean leader reportedly agreed to send thousands of D-miners and military construction staff to Russia. This includes 1,000 so-called sappers who clear mines and 5,000 military construction staff. They'll be working to rebuild Russia's Kursk region. Now, North Korea previously also supplied thousands of combat troops and weapons to Russia. That's why Moscow now agreed to build a memorial in honor of the North Korean troops who died fighting against Ukraine. And as Russia gets help from North Korea, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking aid from Western allies. Zelensky departed the G7 summit without securing additional aid from the US. President Trump had to leave the summit early due to developments in the Middle East. But Canada has agreed to provide almost $1.5 billion in new military assistance to Ukraine. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee on the Pentagon's budget request for fiscal year 2026. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details.
The Indo-Pacific is our priority theater and China is our pacing threat. That's why I've traveled twice to that region to visit our forces and meet with our allies and partners. We applaud those allies who are stepping up, but others need to do more and quickly.
The White House is requesting over $1 trillion for the Department of Defense for fiscal year 2026, $131 billion through the appropriations process, and over $150 billion included in the reconciliation bill. This is just over 3% of GDP, and some Republican lawmakers believe it's insufficient.
Four main adversaries: Xi Jinping and his Chinese Communist Party, Vladimir Putin's militarized Russia, Kim Jong-un's North Korea, and the Ayatollahs. Clearly, such a budget plan would allow the military balance to continue, as it has been, to tilt away from the United States and toward Communist China.
Democratic senators pressed Secretary Hegseth on whether the U.S. will take actions against Iran.
Most of what I can or should say would be reserved for a classified setting. I would say the president, obviously, any decisions on this matter are at the presidential level. He has communicated very clearly for quite some time.
I do understand that, Mr. Secretary, but my question for you is whether you have been asked actively to provide options for the president regarding a strike in the Middle East.
If I had or I had not, I wouldn't disclose that in this forum, Senator. My job, our job, Chairman and I, at all times, is to make sure the president has options and is informed of what those options might be and what the ramifications of those options.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth also dispelled Democratic senators' impression that changes in the hierarchy of the Pentagon are affecting the combat readiness of the Department of Defense.
Sir, I would just say the media loves sensational headlines that are not connected at all to reality. If you look at the execution of our office and what we've done on the president's priorities, I'm very proud of what we've been able to do in 140 days. And when you move fast to reestablish deterrence and restore a warrior ethos and rebuild the military, it's going to come with some changes.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who is not in the Appropriations Committee, demanded this Wednesday that senators have a private briefing on the situation in Iran. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The Federal Reserve today held the interest rate steady at 4.25%. The decision was unanimous. Powell noted that the economy is expanding at a solid pace. He said uncertainty about the economic outlook has diminished somewhat, but still remains elevated. Inflation has eased from 2022 levels, but also remains elevated and is expected to hit 3% by the end of this year. Inflation is projected to fall to 2.4% next year. Fed officials still foresee 2 interest rate cuts by the end of this year, as they projected in March. Coming up, 2 people are under arrest after a hit and run at a No Kings protest that left a young woman critically injured. Meanwhile, the Department of Defense is deploying more National Guard troops to Los Angeles. Christina Corona reports from LA. And General Mills joins other big American food companies with an announcement. It's making its products more MAHA friendly. Jason Blair has the update when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Jurors have found Karen Reed not guilty of murder and not guilty of fleeing the scene in the 2022 death of her boyfriend. The jury did convict the 45-year-old for drunk driving. This was the state's second attempt to convict Reed. Reed's first trial ended July 1st in a mistrial due to a hung jury. Reed was accused of fatally striking her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her SUV in 2022. Reed's defense contended that O'Keefe was beaten, then left outside a suburban Boston home in a conspiracy orchestrated by the police. Prosecutors had alleged that Reed killed O'Keefe and left him to die in the snow because she was angry with him. Reed will serve 1-year probation for the drunk driving charge. A violent turn at a No Kings protest in Southern California ends in 2 arrests, including the suspected hit-and-run driver and an alleged accomplice. And as anti-ICE demonstrations continue in California, thousands of additional National Guard troops are being deployed to Los Angeles. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
2 people have been arrested in connection with a hit-and-run incident during a weekend No Kings protest in Riverside that left a 21-year-old woman critically injured. It happened around 9:10 p.m. Saturday on University Avenue between Orange and Main Streets, where several thousand people had gathered for one of hundreds of No Kings protests across the globe. Police say an SUV veered into the crowd, striking the demonstrator. She remains hospitalized in critical condition. Following tips from the public, officers arrested the suspected driver, a 58-year-old Riverside man, Russell Prentice, on Monday. He was booked for assault with a deadly weapon and hit and run causing injury. A 39-year-old woman, Candace Wenzel, was also taken into custody, accused of driving the SUV into the Mojave Desert and destroying evidence. She could face charges of accessory after the fact and evidence tampering. Meanwhile, nearly 2 weeks after anti-ICE protests erupted across Southern California, the Department of Defense has deployed 2,000 additional National Guard troops to the Los Angeles area. Activated in a Title X status, the troops are tasked with protecting federal personnel, property, and operations. They're currently completing training in de-escalation, crowd control, and rules for the use of force. This comes as a federal court weighs whether President Trump or Governor Newsom has the final say over California's National Guard. Now, officials stress these troops will not engage in civilian law enforcement. Their mission is strictly federal security. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
A federal judge found Florida's Attorney General in civil contempt of court yesterday for violating a restraining order. District Judge Kathleen M. Williams ruled that James Uthmeyer violated a temporary restraining order that required him to stop enforcing a newly enacted immigration law. The state law makes it a crime for adult illegal immigrants to enter or re-enter Florida and carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence of 9 months. Uthmeyer had sent a letter to state law enforcement agencies saying he could not prevent them enforcing the new law. Williams found this letter to be in contempt of her order. She ordered the AG to now submit bi-weekly reports on actions made under the new law. General Mills is the latest big food company saying it's giving artificial food dyes the boot. This is just 1 day after Kraft Heinz made a similar announcement. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
Food giant General Mills announces that they are removing synthetic food dyes from all of their U.S. cereals as well as K-12 school foods by next summer. They say they also plan to transition all of their foods by the end of 2027. The company's CEO, Jeff Harmening, says today the vast majority of our foods are made without certified colors, and we're working to ensure that will soon apply to our full portfolio. On Tuesday, Kraft Heinz made a similar announcement saying that they will fade out synthetic colors from all of their products by 2027, as well as not launch any new ones containing them.
The vibrant colors that don't appear in nature and food
mess with the mind of a developing child.
The HHS has been campaigning to get companies to remove petroleum-based food dyes and replace them with, quote, natural ingredients for American children, as they have already done for European and Canadian children.
As you know, there's two versions of cereal made by American companies, one with the vibrant colors for American kids and one without them for Canadian kids, both made by the American company.
On Wednesday, HHS Director Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that coffee giant Starbucks will, quote, further MAHA their menu, and that the chain already avoids artificial dyes in their items. And in May, burger chain In-N-Out announced that they are replacing synthetic dyes with natural ones in their pink lemonade and strawberry milkshakes. They also say they are transitioning to a new ketchup that will use real sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Police say there was a break-in at the home of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman. This was just days after she and her husband were killed. On Tuesday, lawmakers in Washington called for justice and additional security.
I'm profoundly grateful to law enforcement that the alleged shooter is now in custody, and I look forward to seeing him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's no place for this kind of violence in our country. None.
Public servants should never have to fear for their lives simply for doing their job. Public servants, there should not be an attempt to intimidate public servants not to do their job or not to take their job. So we need immediate steps. We need to take immediate steps to ensure the safety of members. That includes sending additional funding and resources to the Capitol Police.
Over the weekend, suspect Vance Belter allegedly shot and killed the Hortmans and wounded two others, including another official. This morning, police were investigating an apparent break-in at the Hortmans' residence. Police said that the home appeared to have been searched, but the family believes that nothing is missing. According to the U.S. Capitol Police, threats against lawmakers have more than doubled over the last decade, nearly 9,400 last year alone. President Trump was also targeted in 2 assassination attempts in 2024. Coming up, new decisions from the Supreme Court on gender transition procedures and nuclear waste. Arlene Richards brings us that roundup. And how significant is the High Court's decision to uphold Tennessee's ban on gender transition procedures for minors? Will other states follow with similar rules? Biologist Colin Wright weighs in after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer, looking at the latest Supreme Court rulings today. The court upholding Tennessee's ban on gender transition procedures for minors. Another decision impacting the storage of nuclear waste. NTD's Arlene Richards brings us the updates.
The Supreme Court decided 2 cases on Wednesday, starting with a ruling on gender transition procedures. The court, in a 6-3 decision, upheld the state of Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for transgender minors. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, said that the law banning puberty blockers and hormone treatments for minors doesn't violate the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. The clause requires the government to treat similarly situated people the same. The ruling effectively protects the Trump administration from legal challenges for recent efforts to roll back protections for transgender people. 26 states have laws similar to the one in Tennessee. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, writing the dissenting opinion, said the court abandoned transgender children and their families to political whims. And in Texas, the High Court ruled the state of Texas and others could not pursue their claims against the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The commission approved a facility in Texas for storage of nuclear waste. The majority said the state had failed to intervene at an earlier stage of the approval process. But the court didn't answer the legal question of whether the commission had the authority to approve a privately owned storage site. The commission allowed a company to store spent nuclear fuel in a Texas facility for up to 40 years. The plaintiffs argued the site could effectively become permanent because the commission could extend the 40-year deadline indefinitely. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Joining us now to discuss the Supreme Court's decision to uphold Tennessee's ban on gender transition procedures for minors is biologist Colin Wright. He's the CEO and editor-in-chief of Reality's Last Stand, and he's also a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Colin, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, first, how significant is this ruling today for the nation?
It's a really big decision. So it doesn't just make it so this is now the law of the land that gender affirming procedures for minors or sex change procedures for minors is the law. Really, it just kicks it back down to the states, okay? Because the thing under question was whether or not these types of procedures or bans on these procedures constituted a form of sex discrimination. And if that was the case, that it would require a much higher scrutiny of legal scrutiny to be applied to these cases. But that was rejected by the courts today, saying they didn't meet quite that standard, and said they just need to have a rational basis, so a rational reason or a goal that are in the government's interest, essentially, to restrict these procedures. So there's still other ways that states can go about trying to go around this law, maybe looking at things like parental rights arguments and things like that, but at least they can't make the sex discrimination argument.
Now, right now, roughly half of U.S. states have bans similar to Tennessee's. What are you expecting to see at that state level following this ruling? How likely are we to see more states follow with similar rules to Tennessee's?
I think a lot of states were just sort of waiting on pins and needles for this to go through, because it would essentially dictate how bold they could be in their bans on these procedures. So I think we'll see a lot of these new cases moving forward in different states. But I also think we'll see a shift in the tactics on how people from the left are going to be trying to go at this. As I mentioned, they might take a parental rights approach. And I think another thing they're going to do is they're going to really change the argument. So the bridge that they wanted to go on was this one where they're not denying biological reality. They're essentially affirming that sex is real and that these laws that banned these procedures were discrimination based on sex. But now they're going to have to probably try to demonstrate that being transgender is itself this immutable characteristic and this is a protected class. That's going to be much more difficult for them to argue, because it's going to require them to really make these pseudoscientific arguments about the sex being a social construct and things like that. But they're kind of all out of options. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in courts.
And as you mentioned earlier, petitioners in the case, including the Biden administration, argued that this law would violate the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment by discriminating based on sex. Now, the Tennessee counter-argument, which the Supreme Court upheld, was that this law is based on age, not sex. Break this down for us, the sex versus age question in this case.
Well, if it was based on sex discrimination, then, as I mentioned, that would have to go up to a higher scrutiny of legal analysis. So instead, they said that actually didn't meet this basis because in their minds, being transgender, this is not some immutable trait. This is not, they haven't faced a legacy of discrimination. They're not a powerless group in here. And so it didn't rise to a case that would be, maybe if we were analyzing a case about racial discrimination or sexual discrimination or things like that. So the court instead, they said that, no, this isn't discrimination based on sex. This is discrimination based on age. Okay, it's a ban on these procedures for minors and treatment purpose. Okay, so you can, if you're a boy who wants to have gender affirming procedures or whatever to appear like a girl, well, those aren't going to be allowed. But if you want to take, testosterone or something like that for an actual condition that you have, that is still okay to do. So I think it's really. It's a new law that's based in reality and based in differential diagnosis in doctors and based in really evidence-based medicine.
And when it comes to what some are describing as gender affirming care for minors, what changes are you expected to see in that area following this ruling?
So this, it's emboldening states to have their laws that ban things like puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries and things like that. I don't think we're going to see much change in what the people on the left want from this, what the progressives and the pro-gender affirming care movement wants. I think we're going to see Republican states probably try to add more of these types of procedures to their list of things that are banned. They might try to expand the age range as well, because there's not good evidence of outcomes for these procedures, not just for minors, but also for adults as well. There's just no long-term studies. So even adults are, they're worthy of having their treatments based in real evidence and not just in ideological sort of progressive principles. So I think we'll see an expanding of the age range as well. That's, I think, the main thing we're going to see.
And to that point, you mentioned last time when SCOTUS took up this case that the role the cast review was playing in the case. Talk to us about this, and what are your thoughts on a potential American version of the cast review?
Yeah, so the cast review came up several times in the decisions that were made by the Supreme Court justices. This was a really big review, a systematic review that was performed. Actually, it was about 7 systematic reviews that were performed at once, and the cast review was sort of a systematic review of those systematic reviews that investigated a bunch of different aspects of what they call gender-affirming care, or these sex change procedures for minors, that found that there was very little evidence of any evidence of benefit for these things. So the judges, or the justices, cited this a lot because it's a really great mountain of evidence that shows that there's no good justification for these procedures. We haven't had quite something so extensive in the U.S., but we did just release, from the HHS, they did a comprehensive review that's currently in review right now, a systematic review of the current evidence. So we'll see how that lasts when it goes through peer review, but it is a pretty robust document. We're still supposed to have the APA coming out with a systematic review, although they haven't seemed to have registered it anywhere yet, and that was 2 years ago. So we're still behind compared to the UK.
Well, Colin Wright, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Coming up in the NHL, the Florida Panthers are Stanley Cup champions for the 2nd straight year. Dave Martin joins us to discuss. And a medieval town in France was transformed into a living museum for a few days, where visitors immerse themselves in Middle Age traditions. David Vives takes us there after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A medieval town in France was transformed into a living museum for a few days, where visitors immerse themselves in Middle Age traditions. Many said they'd love to bring back the simplicity and beauty of that era. NTD's international correspondent David Vives transformed himself to match the atmosphere.
Every year, the medieval city of Provence becomes a meeting point of all lovers of the Middle Ages. Visitors take a trip back in times with medieval costumes, drinks, food, and shows. Craftsmen, merchants, and artists revive the finest and most beautiful traditions from the past. The city has preserved its medieval architecture for nearly 1,000 years. Tourists and school groups visit year-round. About 1 million visitors from across Europe are expected to attend the festival. Visitors can try medieval dancing. All it takes is remembering the right and left steps in rhythm. Some of the most iconic shows reenact medieval activities. One of them is falconry, a display of birds of prey in flight. These birds were once used for hunting. Today they help preserve ancient knowledge. Manager Anaïs Nicoreta says working with birds creates a special bond with them.
From the moment the birds arrive here in Provence, we bond with them, and then they get to know the site and feel at home here. There's trust between us, a strong connection, and a daily routine. In other words, they are at home, they are on their territory, they are imprinted with humans, they know us. So we ask them to do things they are naturally capable of doing in the wild, to get food. Our work in Provence, as well, in other events, serves to shine a light on a species that is often endangered, in fact. We are working to make them known to the public and participate to promote animal and land protection programs.
Another key show is Knights and Damsels, which brings medieval life to the stage.
We bring medieval living back to life. We are fortunate to have a magnificent medieval town that is well preserved. We offer your little knights and princesses the chance to relive the era all year round, not just during the holidays, allowing people to revisit their childhood and immerse themselves in our history.
Many medieval crafts have nearly disappeared. What machines do in minutes once took days. Lace making is one of these.
Years and years ago, lace makers would work on small squares on their knees with a small stool under their feet. And that was how they started to earn a living. They didn't have much light in their homes, so they would light their work with a candle or a small lantern.
More medieval fairs and events are planned in Provence this summer. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, but let's start in the NHL as the Florida Panthers repeated as Stanley Cup champions last night, beating Edmonton 5-1. What were some of the major factors in this series?
You know, for one thing, it seemed like Edmonton was constantly playing catch-up in this series. Now, they scored first in Game 1, but that was the only time in this series that they first scored the first goal of the game. And that's tough against Florida and their tough defense and goaltending to always have to come from behind. And as much firepower as Edmonton had on offense, you know, with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, it was really Florida that did all the scoring. Now, Sam Reinhart, 4 goals last night, 7 overall in the series. Brad Marchand had 6, including that double overtime winner in Game 2. Sam Bennett had 5 and 15 overall in the playoffs. He was chosen as a Conn Smythe winner as the playoff MVP. Let's listen to what he said afterwards. He was obviously very humbled by the honor.
It's a huge honor. I mean, the depth of this team is just, it's remarkable. The amount of guys that stepped up this year and had incredible years, incredible playoff runs. It truly could have went to anyone. I mean, I'm so grateful. It's such a huge honor, but I truly mean that. It could have went to anyone, and you know, couldn't have done it without my teammates. They were unbelievable, and their reactions, yeah, they meant the world to me.
So 2 in a row now for Florida, both over Edmonton, and we got some late breaking news. Apparently, in all this celebration, the Stanley Cup trophy got damaged. Apparently, a big crack through the top bowl. Anyway, they think they are going to be able to have it fixed by Sunday's parade. So just an FYI for you. It must have been some crazy celebration going on. I don't know if somebody sat on it or what. We haven't actually heard, but Stanley Cup trophy broken, but should be fixed soon.
All right, there you have it for trivia night. Moving to NBA news, ESPN is reporting that the Los Angeles Lakers have entered an agreement to sell a majority ownership of the franchise. What kind of valuation could they expect to get in return?
Yeah, billions. Now, according to the report by both, this is according to ESPN and the AP, the Lakers have agreed to a $10 billion price tag. Now, that's almost $4 billion more than the Celtics, who were just sold in the last year, were also probably maybe the second most valuable franchise in the NBA. But the Lakers, they've been owned by the Buss family since 1979, the late Dr. Jerry Buss. But the Lakers, the LA Kings, and the Forum, where they played at, for $67.9 million, so quite the return there. And since they've been in the Buss family, they've been very successful. 11 NBA titles. Their last one is in 2020. And they hand them off, it's still in very good shape. You still have 40-year-old LeBron James still there with his son, Bronny. Plus, you've got 26-year-old Luka Doncic as really their star of the future. So the new owner is going to be Mark Walter, who's the CEO of TWG Global. But this is big. I mean, the Lakers are the premier franchise in the NBA.
Lots of money for sure. Shifting gears to Olympic news. Yesterday, the Senate held a hearing over the World Anti-Doping Agency's investigation into the Chinese swimmers' doping scandal from 2021 that resulted in no penalties for the Chinese team. What did you feel were some of the most revealing testimony?
You know, there's really a lot to unpack here, but let's just actually review here. 23 Chinese swimmers tested positive for a banned substance just a few months before the 2021 Olympic Games in Tokyo. Now, the World Anti-Doping Agency cleared them, though, allowing them to compete. Now, the big question has been regarding WADA's investigation and China's explanation. China said it found trace elements of trimetazidine, or TMZ, at a hotel kitchen where the athletes were staying. There was no explanation of how it actually got there, though. Now, TMZ is a heart medication. It improves endurance and blood flow. It's been banned since 2014. Now, WADA accepted their explanation without really any on-the-ground explanation. Of course, this is during the COVID years of 2021. Now, of course, not everyone bought China's explanation. Now, you can count Travis Tigert, who's the CEO of the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, as one of those people. Here's what he pointed out yesterday during that hearing.
In fact, months before these positive tests showed up on their desk,
They had interviewed a defector, a whistleblower from China, who had indicated to them that TMZ was being given in a systemic fashion to athletes, but yet WADA leaders never brought in their independent investigative unit. They have a 16-person, very experienced investigative unit. They were not involved at all with investigating the facts of this case. TMZ is a prescription medication in some countries. It does not just show up in the kitchen. It's unbelievable to think that, Tinkerbell showed up and sprinkled it within the kitchen. The Chinese didn't find anyone using it. They didn't find it in the food. And the amount of food, the amount of contaminated drink you would have to actually eat or consume to get these levels was a few micrograms. I think we did the analysis based on the information that's out there. It's like 11 pounds of food and over, I think, 7 gallons of liquid in order to get the levels. And to think that Chinese athletes at the top of their game are going to do that type of diet the day before an event or the day after one event before the next day's race is just absolutely ludicrous. And it's why we've asked for the questions. Why hasn't this followed the process and the protocols that are in place?
So pretty convincing their testimony by Tigard. I mean, obviously implying that only Tinkerbell probably could have actually done this, and it's nearly sounds pretty difficult. You eat 11 pounds of food and consume 7 gallons of water the day before or after. But very convincing testimony there, I thought, from Travis Tigard.
Well, a scandal for sure. Well, Davis, always thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For on-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.